I stared at the frozen turkey sitting on the counter. It was a 20-pound bird rock, hard, sweating slightly in the frigid kitchen air. The heating system had been acting up all week, but my parents said they'd call someone after the holidays. My breath puffed in little white clouds in front of my face. My phone lit up on the counter, vibrating against the marble. A group chat notification. Mom created group, holiday bliss. A photo loaded. My mother, Susan, holding a champagne flute, beaming. Next to her, my father, Jeffrey, looking relaxed in a linen shirt. And in the background, my twin sisters, Ashley and Jessica, already wearing oversized sunglasses, clinking glasses in what was clearly a first-class cabin. The caption read, "Finally some peace." Then a text message followed, simple and efficient. "Boarding now, see you in 10 days. House alarm is set, don't wait up." I looked back at the turkey. I was 13 years old. I didn't know how to cook a turkey. I didn't know how to fix a furnace. And apparently I wasn't worth a plane ticket. I didn't cry. I didn't text back asking why. I just stood there in the cold, realizing that family was a word they used when it was convenient, and right now I wasn't. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The silence in the house was heavy, like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. I couldn't cook the turkey, so I found a frozen burrito in the back of the freezer. It was old, the wrapper coated in frost, but it was calories. I put it in the microwave and pressed the button. The hum of the machine was the only sign of life in the entire house. Then with a sharp pop, the hum died. The little yellow light on the display vanished. The refrigerator motor shuddered and stopped. The power was out. I stood in the sudden absolute darkness of the kitchen. The cold, which had been creeping in from the edges of the room, now seemed to rush forward to claim the space. My breath was invisible now, lost in the black. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I just calculated. I had a coat. I had blankets. I could survive the night if I stayed in one room. That was when the light swept across the kitchen window. Twin beams of high-intensity white light cut through the darkness, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the freezing air. A car was pulling into the driveway. For a second, a pathetic, childish part of me thought they had come back. That they had realized they couldn't leave a 13-year-old alone for 10 days. I ran to the window. It wasn't my parents' sedan. It was a massive matte black SUV idling like a predator at the gate. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a heavy wool coat that looked like it cost more than the car my mother drove. He didn't rush. He walked to the front door with the steady, inevitable pace of a man who owned the ground he walked on. The doorbell didn't ring, no power, but the heavy knock echoed through the foyer. I opened the door. I knew who he was, though I had only seen him in hushed conversations at funerals or in the background of old photo albums. Uncle Robert. The black sheep, the billionaire industrialist my father called soulless and my mother called dangerous. He didn't say hello. He didn't offer a hug or a platitude. He looked at me, taking in my shivering frame, the dark house and the frozen breath in the air. Then he looked past me into the black void of the hallway. "They set the security alarm," he said, his voice like gravel, "but they didn't set up the auto pay for the electric bill." He stepped inside, not waiting for an invitation. He pulled a leather glove off his hand and checked his watch. "Uncle Robert," I whispered. He looked down at me. His eyes were cold, gray, and completely devoid of pity. They were analytical. He was assessing a problem. "Pack a bag, Alyssa," he said. "Essentials only. You are not staying in a museum." "Where are we going?" "Away from here." I ran upstairs. I didn't pack toys. I didn't pack the photo of my family that sat on my nightstand. I packed clothes, my school books, and my laptop. It took me 4 minutes. When I came back down, he was standing in the kitchen looking at the 20-pound turkey still sitting on the counter, useless and freezing. "Leave it," he said. "Let it rot. It suits them." I walked out the front door and climbed into the passenger seat of the SUV. The interior smelled of expensive leather and conditioned air. It was warm. As we pulled away, I watched my childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the dark. I didn't know it then, but I had just crossed a border. I was leaving the world of the discarded and entering the world of the architects. Living with Uncle Robert wasn't about healing. It was about recalibration. His house, a brutalist fortress of concrete and glass perched on the edge of a cliff, didn't have cozy corners. It had sightlines. It had structural integrity. It had silence, not the empty, terrifying silence of my parents' house, but a deliberate, heavy silence that felt like a shield. For the first few months, I tried to make myself invisible. I was an expert at it. I moved through rooms without making a sound. I ate quickly, cleaned up immediately, and retreated to the guest room before anyone could remember I was there. I thought this was the rent I had to pay for existing. One evening, Robert found me sitting in the library, tucked into the shadow of a bookshelf, watching him work at his desk. I froze, waiting to be reprimanded for lurking. He didn't look up from his documents. "You're doing it again," he said. "Doing what I asked," my voice barely a whisper. "Disappearing. You think if you're quiet enough, you won't be a burden. You think silence is a deficit." He finally looked up, pinning me with that gray, analytical stare. "You're wrong. Silence is data." He beckoned me over. He pointed to a blueprint on his desk, a complex commercial development. "Tell me what you see." I looked at the lines. "I see a lobby, elevators, offices." "Look closer. What do you see?" I hesitated. Then I let my natural instinct take over, the instinct honed by 13 years of watching a family that never watched me back. "The flow is wrong," I said. "The reception desk faces the window, so the receptionist will be blinded by the afternoon sun. The elevators are too far from the main entrance, so people will congregate in the middle and block the flow. It's inefficient." Robert smiled. It was a terrifying, sharp thing. "Exactly. You see the flaws because you spend your life in the background watching how people move. Your family ignored you, Alyssa. They treated you like furniture. But while they were busy posing for photos, you were studying the room. You noticed the cracks in the foundation while they were admiring the paint." That was the moment the narrative shifted. He didn't offer me pity for being the forgotten child. He offered me a job description. The gift of the shadow, he called it. The ability to see the truth, because no one thinks you're important enough to hide it from. "You don't talk, Alyssa," he told me. "You watch. That isn't weakness. That is dangerous. That is power." From that day on, my education began. He didn't buy me dolls or video games. He bought me books on structural engineering, contract law, and negotiation tactics. He taught me that architecture wasn't just about buildings. It was about controlling behavior. If you control the structure, you control the people inside it. My teenage years weren't marked by proms or football games. They were marked by site visits and board meetings, where I sat in the corner taking notes on who was lying and who was desperate. I stopped checking my phone for texts from my mother. I stopped looking at the photos of their vacations in the Bahamas or the Alps. Those glossy images were just facades, and I was learning to look past the cladding to the rotting beams underneath. I wasn't the abandoned daughter anymore. I was a project under construction. And the foundation was being poured with concrete, steel, and absolute cold resolve. By the time I was 16, I had learned more about leverage than most adults learn in a lifetime. But there was one lesson left. I needed a workspace. My desk was a card table I'd salvaged from the basement, and it wobbled every time I erased a line. I found Robert in the solarium, reviewing quarterly reports. "I need a new desk," I said. "And a drafting lamp. The lighting in my room is insufficient." He didn't look up. "How much?" $800. I blinked. He wasn't stingy. He drove cars that cost more than houses. Why not? Because buying you furniture teaches you nothing. Building it teaches you everything. He slid a check across the table. It was for $5,000. "This is your budget. I don't want you to buy a desk, Alyssa. I want you to design a sanctuary." He looked at me then, his eyes boring into mine. "Your family made you feel unsafe in your own home. They made you feel like a guest who overstayed their welcome. I want you to build a room where you are the authority, where you feel untouchable. If you can build that, you can build anything." I took the check. I spent the next 3 months obsessed. I didn't just buy furniture. I curated an environment. I tore up the carpet to reveal the concrete subfloor. I painted the walls a deep slate gray that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. I designed a custom L-shaped desk and hired a local welder to build the frame, negotiating the price down by pointing out flaws in his previous work. I installed soundproofing. I bought an ergonomic chair that felt like a cockpit. I created a space that wasn't soft or pretty, it was a command center. When it was finished, I called Robert in. He stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room. He checked the welds on the desk. He tested the throw of the light. He noted the acoustic panels. He turned to me and nodded. Just one sharp, decisive nod. Good, he said. That nod was worth more than the $5,000. It was validation. It was the first time an adult had looked at something I created and treated it with respect. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing with the ghost life of my other family. Mom just landed in Aspen. The twins look adorable in their ski gear. Dad, thinking of you, hope you're studying hard. I scrolled past the photos of them drinking hot cocoa in a lodge I would never visit. I looked at their smiling, vacuous faces. Years ago, that would have crushed me. I would have wondered what was wrong with me. But sitting in my gray, silent sanctuary, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and ozone, I realized something. Their rejection hadn't broken me. It had freed me. I didn't need their approval to fill a room. I could build my own walls. The years blurred into a singular focus. I graduated high school early. I went to architecture school funded entirely by Robert, who called it an investment in infrastructure. I graduated top of my class. I started my own firm at 24. By 28, I was designing skylines. I was the architect, and my foundation was unshakable. Uncle Robert didn't fade, he concluded. It was a business decision. His heart was failing, the structural integrity compromised beyond repair. He refused the hospital. He chose the master bedroom overlooking the ocean where he could monitor the tides. 2 days before the end, he summoned me. He wasn't sentimental. He was strategic. Sit, he rasped, his voice like dry leaves on concrete. He pointed to a thick, sealed manila envelope on the nightstand. That is the demolition order. Do not open it until the reading. I won't. They will come back, Alyssa. The moment the heart monitor flatlines, they will smell the money. They think I am their ATM. They think you are the janitor. He gripped my wrist, his strength surprising me. Don't let them in. Not into your head. Not into this house. He died on a Tuesday morning efficiently between the hours of 4 and 5 a.m. I didn't cry then. I had work to do. I called the lawyer. I called the funeral home. I secured the perimeter. The funeral was held 3 days later. It was a small private service at the Cliffside Chapel, or it was supposed to be. At 10:55 a.m., a fleet of 3 stretched limousines rolled up the gravel drive. They were rented. I recognized the company plates. My family stepped out. They were dressed in designer morning wear, black silk oversized sunglasses, veils. My mother, Susan, practically collapsed into my father's arms, sobbing loudly for a brother she hadn't spoken to in 15 years. My sisters Ashley and Jessica were live streaming their grief, dabbing at dry eyes with lace handkerchiefs. They looked like a bad production of a Greek tragedy. I stood by the grave wearing a sharp charcoal suit I'd designed myself. They walked right past me. They didn't see the CEO of a multi-million-dollar firm. They saw the 13-year-old girl in the frozen kitchen. They saw a non-entity. Poor Robert, I heard Susan whisper to Jeffrey loud enough for half the congregation to hear. Thank God he didn't marry. The estate should cover the bankruptcy and the renovations on the summer house. They weren't mourning. They were calculating. After the service, they cornered me near the hearse. They didn't hug me. They didn't ask how I was. Alyssa, my father said, his voice dripping with that familiar, patronizing tone. You look tired. He thought I was the nurse. We'll take it from here, sweetie, my mother added, patting my arm with a gloved hand. You've done your duty. We're going to head up to the house to appraise the furniture. We need to see what's worth keeping before the estate sale. She held out her hand. Do you have the keys, or do we need to call a locksmith? I looked at them, and suddenly the architecture of their cruelty made perfect sense. For them to be the Golden family, they needed a failure. They needed me to be the broken, abandoned niece who scrubbed the floors. If they acknowledged that I was the one in power, that I was the architect, their entire self-image would collapse. They needed me to be small so they could feel big. They weren't just vultures. They were parasites starving for a host. The lawyer has the keys, I lied, my voice flat and cold. The reading is tomorrow at the firm. Until then, the house is sealed. Sealed, Ashley scoffed. It's our house. Tomorrow, I said, and turned my back on them. I walked to my car, got in, and watched them in the rearview mirror, arguing with the security guards I had hired to keep the gate locked. The conference room at the law firm was designed to intimidate. It was all dark, mahogany, floor-to-ceiling windows, and air conditioning set to a temperature that kept you awake. My family sat on one side of the table. I sat on the other. Jeffrey was checking his watch, tapping a manicured finger against the polished wood. Susan was whispering to the twins, Ashley and Jessica, who were scrolling through real estate listings on their phones. They were already spending the money. They looked at me only once with a mixture of pity and annoyance, like I was a stain on the tablecloth they couldn't quite scrub out. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, entered the room. He didn't carry a briefcase. He carried a single, thin file folder. He sat down at the head of the table and adjusted his glasses. Robert preferred efficiency, he said, his voice dry as dust. So I will be brief. Just read the numbers, Jeffrey said, leaning back in his chair. We know he was liquid. Sterling ignored him. He opened the folder. To my brother Jeffrey, he read. I leave you the debt you accrued in 1998. The promissory note for the failed venture is hereby forgiven. You are now solvent. You are welcome. Jeffrey blinked. What? That debt was written off years ago. Where is the cash? Sterling continued. To my sister-in-law, Susan, I leave you the silence you gave your daughter. May it bring you the same comfort it brought her. Susan's mouth fell open. I don't understand. Is this a joke? And finally Sterling said, looking directly at me, to my niece Alyssa, the architect of her own life, I leave the entirety of my estate. The firm, the properties, the investment portfolios, and the residual assets. Everything. The silence in the room lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then it detonated. That's illegal, Jeffrey slammed his hand on the table. He was senile, she manipulated him, she was his nurse, she coerced him. We're contesting this, Ashley screamed, dropping her phone. That's our money, we're the family. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I watched them unravel, with the detached interest of a scientist observing bacteria under a slide. Sterling raised a hand. There is one more document, he said. The room quieted heavy with the desperate hope that this was the correction, the real will. Mr. and Mrs. Miller Sterling said to my parents, you claim Alyssa coerced Robert. However, this document suggests a different dynamic. He slid a piece of paper across the mahogany table toward Jeffrey. It was yellowed with age. I recognized Robert's sharp, angular handwriting and next to it the loopy, careless signatures of my parents. What is this? Susan whispered. A loan agreement, Sterling said, dated December 24th, 15 years ago, the day you left for the Bahamas. My blood ran cold. The date, the frozen turkey, the empty house. You borrowed $500,000 from Robert, Sterling continued, his voice devoid of emotion. To cover gambling debts and lifestyle maintenance. Robert agreed to pay it on one condition. He pointed to a clause at the bottom of the page. Collateral, Sterling read. In exchange for this sum, Jeffrey and Susan Miller agree to waive all parental claim to Alyssa Miller. They agree to transfer physical custody to Robert Miller and cease all financial and emotional support. They agree that the child is the burden of the lender. The world stopped turning. They hadn't forgotten me. They hadn't just been negligent. They had sold me. I looked at the paper. $500,000. That was my price tag. That was why they never called. That was why they never came back. It wasn't because I was unlovable. It was because they had cashed the check. I looked up at my parents. I expected to see shame. I expected to see regret. Instead, I saw annoyance. We were in a bind, Jeffrey said, his voice rising in defense. He had all the money. It was the only way he would help us. We did what we had to do to survive. We gave you a better life, didn't we? You lived in a mansion. We sacrificed you, Susan cried, tears streaming down her face, tears for herself. It cost you exactly $500,000, I said. My voice didn't shake. It was the voice of the architect. And you spent it all. This is entrapment, Jeffrey shouted at the lawyer. He can't hold that against us. We want our share. You got your share, I said. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. 15 years ago, you traded a daughter for a lifestyle. The transaction is complete. I looked at the document one last time. It wasn't a tragedy. It was a receipt. The room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. I stood there looking down at the people who had given me life and then sold it for a quick payout. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt clarity. The kind of clarity you get when you finally see the structural flaw in a building that's been doomed from the start. Alyssa, my mother whimpered, reaching a hand toward me. Please. We're your parents. I looked at her hand. It was trembling, not with love but with the desperate realization that the ATM was closed. No, I said, you're borrowers. And your credit is no good here. I turned and walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. I walked through the lobby of the law firm, past the receptionist, who nodded respectfully, and out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot. I got into my car and drove. I drove past the city limits, past the suburbs where families were living lives I would never understand, and up the winding coastal road to the cliffside house. My house. When I arrived, the gate was open. Security was escorting a familiar black sedan off the property. My parents. They had come straight here hoping to. What beg steel break in? I stopped my car in the driveway and got out. Jeffrey saw me. He rolled down his window, his face twisted with rage. You ungrateful little. Get off my property, I said. My voice was calm. It carried over the sound of the ocean below. Or I will have you arrested for trespassing. This isn't over, he screamed as the security guard waved him forward. We'll sue, we'll take everything. You already took everything, I said. And you spent it. Now get out. I watched them drive away their taillights, disappearing around the bend. Then I turned back to the house. The brutalist concrete structure rose against the sky, stark and unyielding. It wasn't warm, it wasn't fuzzy. But it was strong. I walked inside and closed the heavy front door. I turned the lock. Click. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I walked to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and logged into my contacts. Susan Miller. Delete. Jeffrey Miller. Delete. Ashley Miller. Delete. Jessica Miller. Delete. One by one, I erased them. I blocked their numbers. I filtered their emails to trash. I dismantled the connection with the same precision I used to draft blueprints. I closed the laptop. The house was silent. The table in the dining room, the massive mahogany table where Robert had taught me how to negotiate, how to plan, how to win, was empty. It was perfect. Have you ever had to build your own family from scratch? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe in the power of walking away, hit that like button.